You're listening to the PuckUps Podcast. It's time to hit the ice with Brian DeFelice.
Welcome into episode 2 of the PuckUps Podcast. I am Brian DeFelice, and thank you all for joining me in what has been an absolutely freezing January day here in New England. And while it may be cold outside, the Boston Bruins have been anything but on the ice, and they have won 5 games in a row in 7 of their last 8, including Tuesday night's win over the Detroit Red Wings, a team that Boston is trailing in the Atlantic Division. They followed that up on Thursday with the win over the Seattle Kraken on a night in which the Boston Bruins honored not only a franchise legend, not only a legend of the league, but a legend in the game of hockey. Of course, I'm talking about Zdeno Chara and his number 33 being raised to the Garden Rafters. So we'll talk about that ceremony and his legacy. And lastly, the Boston Bruins have been mentioned in a trade rumor this week. So we'll discuss that player and the reported asking price. But before we get into any of that, I quickly want to remind everybody how you can hear the show and be involved with the show. So please subscribe to the PuckUps on YouTube, on Apple Podcast, on Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcast. And you can tweet at me at Brian DeFelice _. You can tweet at the show at the PuckUps. You can email me info@thepuckups.com, or you can even leave a voicemail to be aired on this show by calling 617-539-6958. Now, as I mentioned off the top, the Boston Bruins have won 5 games in a row and 7 of their last 8. Right now, they have 56 points, a record of 27, 19, and 2, and a points percentage of .583. So right now, that has them good for 5th in the Atlantic Division in both points and point percentage, as well as wild card 2, again, in both points and point percentage. It's worth clarifying that distinction because much of this season, the Bruins have been in one ranking based on points and then another based on points percentage. They don't always line up. So on occasions like this where they do, it's worth highlighting. Now, I mentioned the 5-game winning streak. It has also been a 5-game homestand. So it's a stark difference from the homestand that the Bruins had about a month ago towards the end of December, where they went 1-3-1 and lost 4 in a row after beating Utah to start that homestand. That homestand, of course, saw them lose to the Oilers in regulation, Vancouver in a shootout, and then Ottawa and Montreal in regulation. And those Ottawa and Montreal losses were pretty ugly. Boston gave up a lot of goals. This time around, Boston has outscored their opponents 21-7 over the course of 5 games at home. They had 2 different shutouts, 2 consecutive shutouts. Jonas Korpisalo with the first shutout of the season for the Bruins against the Penguins in a 1-0 win last weekend. And then Jeremy Swayman followed that up with a shutout and a 3-0 win against the Detroit Red Wings, of course, on Tuesday. So let's go and talk about the Bruins and the Red Wings, because that game, in my opinion, was one of, if not the best complete game efforts the Bruins have had all season. Marco Sturm even said as much after the game himself. And the Bruins outshot the Red Wings 41-24. You heard that right, 41-24. So it wasn't really like the Pittsburgh game where Boston was outshot by 10 or 12 shots and for the most part outplayed. Now, the Bruins were on the second of a back-to-back against the Penguins, having just beat the Rangers 24 hours before. So a bit of a letdown was to be expected, I guess, in terms of 60-minute intensity. So the Bruins' win over the Penguins was impressive in and of itself because they were able to find a way to earn the 2 points despite playing in the second of a back-to-back. But it wasn't their prettiest game. It was kind of like their B game effort, right? But the game against the Red Wings, I thought, was Boston's A game. They, from start to finish, were the better team. They were hard on pucks. They were hard on the body. And their shot volume was impressive. Victor Arvidsson had 10 shots alone. So talk about a guy who was feeling it that game. Pavel Zacha got the Bruins on the board. He controlled play throughout the offensive zone, brought the puck up high in the offensive zone. Bit of a broken play. And then credit to Mason Lohrei, who had an impressive pinch and kept the play alive. Pavel Zacha reclaims possession of the puck and makes no mistake with a elite wrist shot, top right corner. It was elbow bar down. And Zacha has a really good shot. He has a really good release. It's a hard shot. You would think his shooting percentage would be a little bit higher than it is, but it isn't. However, when he has shots like that go in, you say to yourself, yeah, he can really wire it. So Zacha continues to play really well, and the Bruins are going to need him to continue to do so. Fraser Minton gave the Bruins a 2-goal cushion off of a beautiful feed from Charlie McAvoy on a play that really started beneath the goal line. Marat Husnudinov grabs the puck, protects the puck, takes it up high. He doesn't really have much of a play, so he smartly just throws it back down away from trouble beneath the goal line, where David Pastrnak claims the puck, again, protects it all the way up to the offensive blue line. While shielding it, he leaves it to Charlie McAvoy. McAvoy pivoted outside of the offensive zone to create some more space for himself, takes the pass. And what I liked about McAvoy here was that he didn't try to go around the Red Wings forward who was checking him up high. I think it may have been Alex DeBrincat. McAvoy took it and just kind of cut right to the middle and just got a quick shot on net and followed his rebound. And then he was able to find Fraser Minton backdoor to give Boston the 2-0 lead. And for Fraser Minton, at the time, that was his 8th point in his last 7 games. He had registered 5 goals and 3 assists over his previous 7 games following the Detroit game. And that gave him 7 goals, 8 assists, and 15 points on the season at 5-on-5, which is 7th on the team in scoring. You know, I mentioned that Arvidsson had 10 shots on goal. Did you know that Victor Arvidsson, Pavel Zacha, and Casey Mittelstadt have played more minutes together than the entire league outside of 5 offensive trios? So that goes to show how much confidence that Marco Sturm has in that second line, a line that he has used primarily as a shutdown line to opposition's top lines. And I was skeptical of Zacha, Arvidsson, and Mittelstadt being put together earlier in the year as a second line. I just found it to be underwhelming. I like a lot of Pavel Zacha's game. He's not the most physical guy, but he's smart and has good two-way skill. Arvidsson is, he's in his early 30s. He's injury prone. He's on the smaller side, the much smaller side. He plays bigger than he is, but I just didn't really trust him because he's had a couple of down years lately. And then Casey Mittelstadt, tons of offensive skill. Two-way game is a little bit of a mystery at times, especially at center ice. And he's been playing primarily wing for Boston this year, and he's been good at it. But I just didn't trust that line to have extended offensive zone time or generation. And to their credit, they have. They haven't had a perfect season. They've had their off nights like everybody, but that line's been good. Didn't see it coming. And it kind of creates some interesting conversations surrounding those 3 guys. I had a question online recently that I answered in a mailbag about if the 3 of them playing so well makes it harder for the Bruins to trade one of them possibly. And I'll be honest, I don't think the Bruins have any interest in trading away Pavel Zacha. I actually think they'll find a way to extend him. Casey Middlestad, I feel like they're going to try to bide their time with. He's under contract similar to Zacha through the end of next season as well. So I don't think the Bruins are looking to rush a decision there. They can probably make a call on trading Middlestad during his contract year at some point. Victor Arvidsson's kind of the one that I'm not so sure about. He's 6th on the Bruins in points with 24, and he's been a good player for them. But he's on an expiring contract, and whether the Bruins are in a playoff position or not, come this year's trade deadline, if somebody offers Boston a first-round draft pick for Victor Arvidsson, I'm sorry, but you got to take it. You have to take it if you're Boston. And I know that may upset the locker room, and players don't care about draft picks, right? They care about their boys, and they care about the here and now. But if Victor Arvidsson can fetch you a first-round pick on an expiring contract, and he's 32 years old and injury-prone, you got to do that. That said, if all he garners Boston is a third-round pick, well, if you're somebody who thinks that getting anything for Arvidsson on an expiring deal, if he's not going to be back in Boston, is better than nothing, then yeah, I mean, I can see why you would think that would be worth it. I don't think I would for a third rounder. Not that third rounders can't turn into anything. I don't know. I'm not gonna mess with the room and upset people for that. Second rounders where it's interesting. Would I trade Victor Arvidsson for a second round draft pick, even if the Bruins are in a playoff position come the trade deadline time? Can I get back to you all on that? I don't know. I mean, I guess it depends on who the team is, and I would assume it's a playoff team, so I would assume that it's a second rounder that's towards the bottom of the second round, not a high second round pick. I don't really see a non-playoff team trading Victor Arvidsson for you on an expiring contract for a draft pick. That's insane. So I would have to think about that. Let's circle the wagon on that one. I would definitely trade Arvidsson for a first-round pick. I don't think I would bother with a third-round pick or worse. Second-round pick, it's tough. What do you guys think about that? Would you trade Arvidsson for a second-round pick, regardless of the Bruins' standings come trade deadline time? I'm not so sure. I'd think about it. But anyway, that line's been really good. And right now, they've been an important line for Boston. And so it's a big win for the Bruins. 3-0 win over the Red Wings. Again, as I said, a team you're chasing in the standings. You'll take that every day of the week and twice on Sunday. Now, moving along to the trade rumor that the Bruins are mentioned in. Speaking of, I'm talking about Arvidsson and Middlestad and Zacha. Zacha's a no-go. Middlestad, I don't see it right now. Arvidsson, maybe. Oh, by the way, the Bruins did have a trade today. It's a more, it's a less significant trade, but they traded Jeffrey Viel to the Anaheim Ducks for a 4th-round draft pick in what has been described as Anaheim's highest 4th-round draft pick of the two that they have. So I think I saw somewhere that Jeffrey Viel only has like 1 goal in his last, I don't know, season or 2 in the NHL. So to get a 4th-round draft pick for him, I think that's good, right? I mean, I like Viel. He was a really good story out of camp. Blue collar, journeyman, hard-nosed guy. Would do anything for his teammates. Really respect Jeffrey Viel. I wish him nothing but the best in Anaheim. Stuck up for his teammates and all of that. And I'm choosing to be happy for him because he's been Boston's like 14th or 15th forward this year. He's one of those guys that you keep on your roster as an extra forward because he doesn't need the development in Providence, but he doesn't need the ice time in the NHL. He's just an extra guy to have around. Like, you don't want to waste Matt Patra if he's going to be your 14th forward, right? So hopefully it's a opportunity for VL to get more ice time. And for Boston, it's a 4th-round draft pick. 4th-rounders, they're not usually going to turn into a ton. There are definitely some hidden gems around the league currently that were 4th-round picks, I think, that turned into pretty good players. But, maybe you can take that 4th-round pick and turn it into a package for something to move up in the draft, a package, another trade, or whatever. So it's always good to have draft collateral if you're the Boston Bruins. But anyway, as far as the trade that's been speculated this week that has not happened, Rasmus Andersson, okay, he's a right shot defenseman for the Calgary Flames. If you aren't aware of him, he is definitely a bona fide top 4 right shot defenseman on any roster in the league. He's probably a top 30 D-man. If I had to, I don't know, put a range on it, maybe somewhere between 25 and 30, 32 top D-men in the league. I don't know. What do you guys think? I mean, unfortunately, he plays out in Calgary, and that's 3 hours behind East Coast time. So if any of you listeners are out in the West Coast of the U.S. or certainly Western Canada, and you have a chance to watch Andersson on a more regular basis, please let me know. But he's a top 4 defenseman, no doubt about it, and he fills a need for the Boston Bruins, or would fill a need for the Boston Bruins. So before I get into why the Bruins would be interested in Andersson, and then give my answer on if I would be interested in Andersson if I were the Bruins, please leave your comments. I'm sure you've seen this story floating around out there. There's arguments to be made for both sides of the aisle. I'll reserve comment until after I play this clip, but just to set it up, Elliot Friedman, who's an insider over at Sportsnet, his Rolodex is as extensive and impressive as it gets for an NHL insider. He's as credible can be in that world that he works in. He has a podcast called 32 Thoughts, where on Monday he had mentioned that the Calgary Flames were trying to move on from Rasmus Andersson prior to the Olympic break. And there's a roster freeze, I want to say, around February 4th. So they're looking to move him. It's kind of the worst kept secret in Calgary. Like, both the player and the team want to move on. Andersson is a pending UFA at the end of this season. So Calgary is obviously in a position where they don't want to lose him for nothing. Well, then on Wednesday, locally, there was a report by Jimmy Murphy of RG Media. And I'll just paraphrase essentially what was in Jimmy's article, but an NHL source had told him and or a rep from RG Media that Jimmy reported on. An NHL rep mentioned that Boston was among a few different teams interested in Rasmus Andersson, and that the Bruins had already made an offer to the Calgary Flames for Rasmus Andersson. So let me try to find these quotes here so that I'm not messing anything up. So right here in the article, it says NHL trade chatter surrounding Calgary Flames defenseman Rasmus Andersson has picked up again. And by all accounts, there are 3 Atlantic Division teams battling it out for Andersson. And I quote, "Keep an eye on the Senators, Bruins, and Red Wings," end quote. An NHL executive told RG recently. Scrolling down a little bit further, Jimmy says, since then, RG has learned more about the NHL trade talks on Andersson and how much they have accelerated. Quote, "The Bruins made an offer," end quote, another NHL source told RG Media on Monday night. Next quote, "I'm hearing that Mason Lohrei and the Bruins' first-round pick are in play," end quote. So that doesn't tell me if it's the Bruins' own first-round pick in 2026, 2027, 2028, or another year. I don't think it'll go much further beyond 27, maybe 28, but it's assumed that it's the Bruins' own first-round pick in 2026. along with Mason Lohrei that are in play. So again, that's speculation. It's kind of an assumption. Maybe it's the Bruins' 27th first-round pick. Either way, Elliot Friedman on Friday morning, once again on his podcast, took to the air and more or less, without naming Jimmy or Jimmy's outlet, he more or less doubled down on reports that were coming out of Boston about the Bruins and Flames being in trade discussions. So here is Elliot Friedman on a 32 Thoughts podcast.
Said on Monday's podcast that that Calgary had indicated that they wanted this trade done before the Olympic break. There's an Olympic trade deadline February 4th. And I believe the Flames want the deal done. And now what I also believe is that Rasmus Andersson would like the trade done by then too. There's been some reports this week about Boston. I definitely think the Bruins are involved. I know there's a lot of Bruins fans in this part of the country. I think they're in there. The toughest thing is always to tell where it is at a particular moment. When it's come to the Bruins and the Flames, I've heard it's on, it's off, it's on, it's off. I know there were some people who thought at one time it was pretty close, then it backed away. Like, we'll see where it goes. There definitely is mutual interest there.
It's on, it's off, it's on, it's off. Elliot sounds like the thoughts that go through my head when I drive away from the house about if I left the stove on or not. Crying out loud, Elliot. Yeah, no, it's interesting. It's interesting to me because you can definitely understand why the Bruins would be interested in acquiring Rasmus Andersson. He's 29 years old. So he aligns with the prime of other players on the Bruins roster, other core players of the Bruins roster. So not only is Rasmus Andersson filling a need for the Bruins, which is a right shot defenseman behind Charlie McAvoy, because right now it's Charlie McAvoy organizationally, and then Andrew Peeke and Henry Jokiharju. Peeke's a pending UFA at the end of the season. Jokiharju's under contract, but both of those guys are ideally third pair guys anyway. So if we're talking top four, there's no NHL right-handed shot top four caliber defenseman. And as far as prospects, they don't even have any right-handed right shot prospect defensemen, really. All the Bruins' younger prospect defensemen are all lefties. So, right? I mean, Vasek Blanar, who they drafted in 2025, 100th overall. Frederick Brunet down in Providence. He's a left-handed shot. It's the left-handed shots. They're you could always improve, but their left-handed shots are fine. Not to mention Jonathan Aspro, who came onto the scene this year as a left-handed shot, who can play the right side. But if we're talking right-handedness, it's Charlie McAvoy, and then it's a huge drop-off, a massive drop-off down to, Henry Jokiharju and Andrew Peeke. So Rasmus Andersson comes in, assuming he'd be on an extension, and immediately solves a hole, not just in the Bruins lineup, but in their organization in terms of right shot, top four caliber defensemen. And you would imagine that he and McAvoy for the next 5 years would solidify that side of the blue line. Then you have Zadorov and Hampus Lindholm on the left, along with Jonathan Aspro, and then you'd plug and play who your right shot defenseman is on, Jokiharju. I guess Jokiharju would be your third pair right shot defenseman, right? So in this world, Lohrei gets traded, and then your top six defensemen are, McAvoy, Zadorov, Lindholm, Anderson, and Aspro and Jokiharju, something like that. Those pairs are interchangeable. I'm not saying that that's the exact pairs I would do. In fact, Zadorov and Anderson may have played together in Calgary, so maybe those two go together, and then you do Lindholm and McAvoy or Aspro, whatever. This is a problem for a different day. I'm not going to try to go through deep pairs that don't exist right now for the Bruins, but you can see why it would make sense for Boston. He's a need, and he aligns with Boston's prime players because Anderson's 25, Pasternik's 25, McAvoy's 28, Elias Lindholm's 31, Hampus Lindholm's 31, Zadorov is 30, Middlestad's 27, Geeky's 27, Swayman's 27. So you have your core kind of all in the same age group, and then you have the next wave beneath them, like Fraser Minton, who's 21. Zdeno is 23, I think. And then James Higgins could be in Boston as soon as the spring. He's 19. Will Zellers, he could be playing in Boston. Probably not after this season for North Dakota, but maybe after his sophomore season at North Dakota. Dean Letourneau is a guy you have that is looking to be a more promising prospect than he was this time last year. And of course, you have multiple picks in the first round in the next couple of years, even if they were to trade one away, right? You still have Toronto's pick in next draft, and the Bruins have 2 picks in 27 and 1 in 28. So it makes sense. Anderson has 10 goals, 19 assists, 29 points, and 47 games played this season. That would currently rank 5th on Boston in points. For his career, he's got 583 games played, 57 goals, 203 assists, 260 points, minus 14, 0.45 points per game average. In the playoffs, he has 7 goals, 7 assists, 14 points, minus 7, 0.52 point per game average in 27 games played. So let's call it for what it is. He's a half a point per game guy, thereabouts. And defensively, he leaves a little bit to be desired. No doubt about it. And he's not the biggest guy, the most physical. But if you have McAvoy and Lindholm and Zadorov and Aspro, do you need him to be very stout defensively? Do you need him to be very physical? No, you really don't. You just need him to be who he is, which is a half a point per game defenseman who can move the puck and potentially run your power play if you don't want it to be McAvoy at some point. I think maybe he takes over for McAvoy right away, if not for unfamiliarity. Maybe over the course of a full off season, they would make that switch, but maybe McAvoy would keep it for now. So those are the reasons why it makes sense, because there's a fine line for the Bruins between building purely for the future while not ignoring their current core's window. What do I mean by that? Well, the fact of the matter is, it sucks for the Bruins that they had to rebuild during Pastrnak and McAvoy's prime and Swayman's prime, etc. Because in order to fully rebuild, you kind of have to embrace sucking for 3, 4, 5 years potentially. Well, you can't really do that when McAvoy's 28 and Pastrnak is approaching 30, and the other guy, like, if they have to suck until they're 33, 4, 5, they're gonna want out of Boston. They're gonna want to trade. They're not gonna want to be around. So you might as well trade them because and go full rebuild. That, of course, isn't the reality. You have to keep those players competitive and try to optimize the primes of their careers. And so now that the Bruins have finally started to replenish their prospect system and draft collateral, this could be an opportunity to help the present and intermediate future while not completely mortgaging your prospect system and draft collateral. But yeah, it's tricky. It's tricky because for me, I got to be honest, Boston's own 2026 first round draft pick, man, I don't think I'm touching it. I don't think I'm touching it. I just don't. Like, I fear that pick could end up being, even if the Bruins, let's say the Bruins finish like with the 14th or 15th overall pick, they could potentially jump up into the top 10. Look at Utah last year. They went from 14th to 4th. The Islanders went from 10th to 1st. Now, is it likely? No, it's more likely you'll win the lottery if you're worse off, but we've seen it before. Like, it can happen. So my biggest fear is that you trade for Anderson and he's good, he's not great, and what would have been your first round pick ends up being like a top 12 pick, and that guy ends up being an absolute stud for the next 15 years. And he's younger. He's a decade younger than Anderson. He's cheaper, more cost effective, and potentially more promising. Now, I know you still have Toronto's first round pick and then 2 next year, but there's something about this draft. It's billed as a very deep and talented draft. I don't think you want to mess with that if you're the Bruins. Now, I will say this. Jimmy Murphy has since responded to Elliot Friedman responding to Boston reports i.e. Jimmy's article. And Jimmy has now said that he heard that Anderson's not open to signing an extension in Boston, at least right now, and that for the time being, the Bruins are now out. So this may be a moot point, but these things can happen quick and they evolve quick. So it's definitely a story to keep an eye on. And what do you think? What do you think? And what's the fine line? How do you strike that delicate balance of building for the future, but not completely at the expense of optimizing your current top players' primes? Because make no mistake about it, David Pastrnak and Charlie McAvoy, they aren't just the Bruins' top players at their positions. They're top players at their positions in the league. David's obviously, a top 3 winger in hockey? I mean, you got Kucherov, Pastrnak, Rantanen, right? I mean, probably right. That's probably the top 3 as far as wingers. Now, McAvoy's not that among defensemen, but he's a top 15 defenseman on his game. He's certainly when he's on his game, I stand by what I just said. If McAvoy's on his game, I think he's a top 15 all-around defenseman. Are there defensemen who are better offensively than him? Yeah. Yeah, no doubt about it. He'll never be Cale Makar. He'll never be Quinn Hughes. Certainly offensively. Hell, even Matthew Schaefer. What a player that kid's going to be, huh? But imagine being 18 years old and just, blowing by guys at the NHL level. Most 18-year-olds are still playing for their local high school. Like, it's crazy. It's crazy. But so you don't want to waste. You don't want to completely waste McAvoy and Pasternak's primes. You don't want to get to a point where you're rebuilding for so long that you finally have a bunch of young players, but guess what? Now McAvoy's 36 and Pasternak's 37, or McAvoy's 34, Pasternak's 35, and it's like now you only have like maybe 1 or 2 kicks at the can with them, who are probably on a downhill at that point, and then whatever young kids you have then, probably led by Higgins and others. Like, I think there's a world where the Bruins are competing with the next wave of Boston Bruins led by James Higgins and Pastrnak and McAvoy at 30 years old, 31 years old. Like, there's a big difference there. So, and if you feel like that's not important, if you feel like it doesn't matter to optimize McAvoy and Pasternak's primes, then you might as well ship them out now and get something for them. I'm not saying to do that. I don't want them to do that. But you know what I mean? If your thought process is, no, just suck until you have all these picks come to fruition, I don't care how old McAvoy and Pastrnak are, then you might as well just trade them, because they're not going to want to stick around. So with all due respect to, that concept of just tanking and building and tanking, I wish McAvoy and Pastrnak weren't the age that they are right now. I wish that your rebuild or retool didn't coincide with their primes. You wish it could have came a little bit earlier, right? You wish that the Bruins could have been more prepared for McAvoy and Pasternak's primes. You wish that the Bruins had a succession plan for Bergeron or Krejci by the time that they retired. Yes, they were always competing for playoffs and the Stanley Cup. The Bruins were always a Stanley Cup contender for the last 15 years. So if you're one of the best teams in the regular season over the course of nearly 2 decades, you're gonna trade some picks at deadlines. You're gonna the few first round picks that you do keep, they're gonna be lower in the draft. So I'm not making excuses for the draft picks that the Bruins did have that they didn't optimize. If you guys want to have a draft conversation with me on a future episode and pick apart missed opportunities here and there, let's do it. Let's do it. Send me drafts, send me picks that you want to talk about. I'm all for it. Anybody who's talked with me or read my rhetoric online, I am not afraid to, shell out blame to anybody within the Bruins organization, whether it's a coach, a player, GM, whatever, at all. So there's a lot of blame to go around regarding the Bruins drafting and developing over the last, let's call it 10, 11 years. They've had a couple of picks, but most of them. So I'm not excusing what they haven't done. I'm just saying it is tougher to do it when you've been as competitive as they have been. So anyway, it's a long-winded way of me saying that I would be hesitant to trade Boston's own 2026 first-round pick for Rasmus Andersson. In a perfect world, I would trade Boston's 2027 first-round pick and Lohrei for Andersson. And if Calgary is playing hardball and they're saying, we want to trade him before the Olympics and we're asking for a 26 first, and I'm the Bruins, I'd say, all right, well, then I guess we're not making a deal. And then see what happens. See if they end up trading him before the Olympics. And if they don't, and you get closer to the deadline, maybe Calgary gets more desperate, less picky for their return because they don't want to risk losing him for nothing. And then maybe they would agree to trade Andersson to Boston for Lohrei and a 27 first. That would be a great situation for the Bruins, but I don't know if it's going to happen. It looks like the Bruins and Andersson might not be in talks right now if the player doesn't want to sign an extension in Boston. So that is that. Again, leave your comments, questions below. Let me know how you feel about it, and we can revisit at a later date, possibly. Moving along to Thursday night, there was a hockey game that was played at 8 p.m., but before that, around 6:20, Zdeno Chara's number was raised to the rafters, and he is just an all-time player, all-time person. He's built different. He changed Boston the second he came to the Bruins. Yeah, the Bruins didn't have a great season in 06-07. They once again finished 13th the second consecutive season in the Eastern Conference. But the impact was, you could see it happening. And all of a sudden, players aren't going to the Bruins crease without paying the price. And you don't want to go into the corner against Zdeno Chara. So the Bruins set the tone in practice with him as captain. And he was just an ultimate culture changer. There's no other way to describe it. One of the best to ever play the game in terms of defensive ability. For not being a great skater, his biggest weapon was his gap control. He understood his reach. He understood how to angle guys, and his gap control was fantastic. It took the place of his lack of mobility. Now, for a guy his size, he became very mobile and he was a very good skater for his size and his dimensions, the size of him and whatnot. So good for him. He came a long way from playing for the Lowell Lock Monsters in the Islanders system. Obviously goes to the Islanders and the Senators and really makes his bones in Boston, where he eventually would become the 13th player to have his banner raised by the Boston Bruins. He was 8th in the franchise's history in games played with 1,023. He was 3rd amongst Bruins defensemen in points with 481. He was a 5-time All-Star in Boston, won a Norris in 08-09, won a Mark Messier Leadership Award in 2010-2011, Stanley Cup champion in 2011, and 14 years as Boston Bruins captain. Of course, if you expand his stats beyond Boston, they're even that much greater. And he was inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame this past fall. So Z's an all-timer. He's a staple of my childhood. And, you just saw from the day he came in, little by little, game by game, year by year, the Bruins turned into champions because of him. And just an unbelievable player. I actually almost got hit by a bike with him riding it in the North End back in the summer of 2016. I forgot to mention that off the top. I was walking from Fleet Street to Hanover Street, and to my left was a building and, the corner of the sidewalk. So I was walking onto Hanover, and as close as a clean shave, I just see 6'9", 280 pounds, whatever he is, go by me on a bike. And right where I was about to step, he goes right by me. It was a blind corner for both of us. So it wasn't like he was like being an asshole and just trying to own the sidewalk. I didn't see him. He didn't see me. If I took one more step, yeah, I may have taken a few blows, but you should have seen the other guy. So that's my Chara story. Never met him besides that one time, and then watching him through my TV for 17 years in Boston, whatever he was here for. 14, I guess, because he was captain every year in Boston. Also just had a huge impact on everybody. Like, Bergeron was only 21 when Chara came to Boston. You kind of forget that because Bergeron came into the league at 18 and was similar to like a Fraser Minton, just a very mature young kid. Like Minton talks and walks like he's like 25 and he's only 21 years old. So you forget how young Patrice was when Chara came to Boston. And speaking of Patrice, here's a funny couple pictures I found online. The Bruins had an alumni charity event at Warrior Ice Arena recently. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can see the picture. But imagine playing a men's league game and you have a 10:30 game at Hockeytown in Saugus, and you're playing, the schedule says Claude's Killers, and you show up to the rink and you got these guys staring across from you. It's like you just hope for running time. I mean, from left to right, you got Danny Paille, Andrew Ference, Chris Kelly, Mark Recchi, Patrice Bergeron, and Tuukka Rask, who's playing out. And then on the blue line, you got Dennis Seidenberg. What an absolute unit he was for the Bruins. Adam McQuaid, Kevin Miller, and Zdeno Chara. I mean, talk about a team you want to play. And they all look like they could still play. They're all in phenomenal shape. We all know what Chara does in his spare time. Kevin Miller looks like he hasn't aged a day. McQuaid looks the exact same. Seidenberg looks the exact same. Mark Recchi is the only one who's put on a couple of pounds of pasta and beer probably. But hey, the Wrecking Ball deserves it. I mean, he's been around forever and he's a legend in his own right. So yeah, it was a really good moment for Chara and for the Bruins, and best of luck to him in his post-playing career where he still is involved with the Boston Bruins in a mentorship capacity. All right, let's finish off here and talk about the Bruins against the Kraken. And it wasn't the Bruins' best game of the year from start to finish. They started off really strong. Marat Husnudinov with a unbelievable goal to kickstart the festivities in regulation for Boston on a pass from Charlie McAvoy. McAvoy's 25th assist of the season. Husnudinov's 10th goal. 1-0 Boston. Strong play to the net, forehand, backhand. And he gives the Bruins a 1-0 lead. And then Victor Arvidsson, shortly thereafter, gives Boston a 2-0 lead. It's the second line's 6th game in a row recording a point. Arvidsson, his 10th goal from Zacha and Casey Middlestat. Pavel Zacha with his 14th 5-on-5 point of the season. 6 of his 14 5-on-5 points have come in his last 6 games. So we've talked about how the Bruins need him to step up his game at 5-on-5, and he has been doing that. Nearly half of his point production this season at 5-on-5 has come in his last 6 games. He, of course, is third on the Bruins in point scoring overall, but if we're talking 5-on-5 production, they need him to pick it up, and he has been. The Bruins took 2 penalties per game in their 4 games prior to Seattle, and that was the category that they've really improved at. They've been undisciplined all year, and they finally have figured it out. It's no coincidence that their 5-game winning streak and 7 of last 8 wins have come with better discipline. Seattle wasn't one of those games. They took 4 penalties. They had 2 power plays of their own. It took a while for the Bruins to get their first power play. I think it was maybe, I don't know, nearly towards the end of the second period, maybe even in the third. And, it cost them because Seattle did go 2 for 4 on the power play. One of the 2 power plays Seattle didn't score on, the Bruins actually did score on. Mark Kastlick with a beautiful individual effort to pickpocket Matty Beniers, who, by the way, is a native of Hingham, Massachusetts, if you haven't heard on every broadcast possible where Seattle's played Boston in the last 3 or 4 years. But yes, he is from Hingham, Mass. Great player, 2nd overall pick in 2021, I believe, but still has some ceiling to go. Probably expect a little bit more production from him at this point in his career, but he can scoot. Mark Kastlick can also scoot, and he picked the pocket of Beniers, went down. Nice backhand goal on Joey Decord. Probably one Decord wants back, but nonetheless, gave the Bruins a 3-1 lead to restore the 2-goal cushion. And while the Kraken would get another power play goal later to make it 3-2, David Pastrnak was scored an empty net goal to give him 20 goals on the year, his 10th consecutive 20-goal season. So he is clearly a player that if he plays his entire career in Boston or close to it, he'll go down as the best goal scorer in Bruins history. No doubt about it. And I think that's really it from that game. Seattle outshot Boston 28-24. So pretty close at the end of the game. But after the Bruins took a 2-0 lead, Seattle took a timeout, and then they really took it to Boston in the final 15 minutes of the first. And I'd say the second and third period were pretty even. But hey, the Bruins will take it. A 5-game win streak, you'll take every day of the week. So they've now won 5 straight, 7 of 8, and they are not comfortably, but they are 5th in the division in points and points percentage. And they are in the playoff picture as a second wild card team in both points and points percentage. They will go on the road Saturday night to play the Chicago Blackhawks. I don't know if Connor Bedard is back in the lineup or not. I know he was injured recently in the last month or so. So they'll go to Chicago to take on the Blackhawks, original 6 matchup, 2013 Stanley Cup final rematch. Always wondered who wins that series if Kasper Dogovins doesn't miss an open net in game 1, in overtime of game 1. A game that goes to the Blackhawks in triple overtime. Kasper, you son of a bitch. Then again, the Bruins did have a 2-1 series lead in game 4 with home ice and a shot away in overtime from taking a 3-1 series lead. So they did end up having a lead in the series in the palm of their hands. Another second guess about that series I have is what happens if Patrice Bergeron was healthy. Everybody always talks about how the Blackhawks were an absolute wagon, and don't get me wrong, they were. If you're asking me to tell you who was the better team, Boston or Chicago, I'm not going to tell you Boston was. Chicago was better, but I don't think one of their top guys was as banged up as maybe Bergeron was, and I think that I don't know. I think that series was a lot closer than a 6-game series would appear. And I just feel like Bergeron being down the way that he was, despite still playing, was pretty significant. Another second guess I have is Claude definitely should have called a timeout after Chicago tied the game late in the third period of game 6 because they had all the momentum in the world. But anyways, I don't want to go down that road again. We're trying to have a nice time here. So they go to Chicago. It is the siblings trip, by the way. So the Bruins and their siblings will be on a trip that will finish off in Dallas. So that'll be a good time. I'm sure they'll go to a rodeo or do some square dancing in the Fort Worth area. And that'll be fun for them. Then they come home and they play Vegas and Montreal. So the Bruins have a tough stretch here. Don't overlook Chicago any given Sunday. With the parity in this league these days, anybody can beat anybody in any given day. So don't overlook the Blackhawks. And then you have some big tests before the Olympic break between Dallas and then Vegas and Montreal back home. So this is a good test for Boston. It's good that they've banked these wins because if you don't dig yourself out of your grave the last 7, 8 games, and then you have to play these teams, yeah, could be closing time, semisonic style. So that is that. Thank you all very much for listening. Enjoy Bruins Blackhawks on Saturday. Once again, please subscribe to the PuckUps on YouTube, Apple Podcast, Spotify, anywhere else you get your podcast. Do you have to say that? Do I have to say that? I feel like an absolute, Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. It's the most cliche line in the history of lines. But I'm going to say it anyway, so fuck it. And yeah, you can reach out to me on Twitter at @BrianDFelice_, at the PuckUps. You can email me info@thepuckups.com. Thank you all very much for listening. Enjoy Bruins Blackhawks on Saturday night. Enjoy your weekend. And we'll be back here to talk to you on Monday.